I think to answer this question, we really need to understand the origins of economics. Where did it come from? And why, in a second step, why did it become so influential in informing public policy? Uh, the contemporary economics is rooted in classical physics. And in the 19th century, people like Walras believed that to understand the economy and societies, we could actually look to the natural sciences. And just as we understand how the planets orbit around the sun, there are similar mechanisms which help us understand how an economy functions. That the economy essentially is like a machine that we can tool up and we can tinker around with it, and we can make it work better. And that's really the origin, that we thought that equilibrium, that gravity models were very good ways of thinking about the economy as a whole, about trade relations, and about some of these big topics. So that's where the science comes from. It does have its roots in physical sciences. And the problem is that while classical physics has really moved on, and we've moved into string theory and a whole range of other things, economics remains stuck in the past and in its origins as a scientific discipline. Um, for instance, Paul Romer, who recently won the Nobel Prize in Economics, he has written a paper called The Problem with Macroeconomics. And he basically argued that while physicists might lament the fact that physics hasn't moved forward, or there has been periods when it hasn't moved forward, macroeconomics actually moved backwards in the last 30 years. We actually understand less about the macroeconomy. And I think the question that you asked is very much inspired by Gregory Mankiw, who was the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Bush. And he said that the economic science had very little to do with the economic engineering that policymakers use. So in other words, the academic discipline had become detached from the tools and the techniques and the theories that policymakers needed. And so why did that emerge? Well, again, Romer gives us some clues. He argues that a big problem in the academic discipline is the deference to authority, that essentially the economics culture is one that tends to keep out new ideas, and it tends to reward those who follow the authorities in the discipline. And so the science has become more and more insular and detached from policymakers. The policymakers, again, they have very specific goals, and this is politically charged. If GDP goes down, governments get voted out. If prices are rising, consumers are unhappy, and then again, there's going to be a political backlash. At the moment, there's a lot of concern about how the COVID crisis is being handled and what is it going to be the impact for jobs. And so there's dysfunction in the machine. And the policymakers just want to find ways of making things work better. And if they look to the scientists, the economic science, they don't always find the answers. And there's a good example of this when the Nobel Prize winners of economics in 2008, just after the global financial crisis hit, they were asked by the most obvious question you could imagine of an economist in November 2008, which was, how is your research relevant to understanding the global financial crisis? And Sargent and Sims, the two Nobel Prize winners, had to reflect that actually their research didn't really tell you anything about the financial crisis. And this was two macroeconomists. So this disconnect between economics that's useful for solving problems and economics that is essentially like poetry. You're writing for other poets, and it's not necessarily something that's really helping us solve societal problems. And I think this is a major problem. It's one, for instance, I was chairing a discussion in Spain once, and there was an economist who had a PhD from Harvard, and very celebrated economist in Spain for his understanding of the housing crisis and other phenomena. And I put this to him, saying that a lot of academic work in economics was just not relevant to understanding these problems. And his response was quite revealing. He said, well, whoever said that economics should be relevant for policy? It's a perfectly respectable academic discipline and academic pursuit. So what's the problem? And I think we do place a lot of expectation on what economists can tell us. There's a lot of very serious problems before them to solve. And the economists are very good at solving certain problems, particularly problems that can be solved with markets. But I think the problem in policy is we've tried to apply that logic and that reasoning to too many disciplines, to too many questions. I don't think, for example, traditional economics is very good when it comes to understanding climate change and the policies that we need to address a big systemic problem like that. It's also that for policymakers, we want, immediate answers. Well, economists haven't ever really been able to figure out what caused the Great Depression or the global financial crisis. There's still a debate on what caused these bigger eruptions. And so there can, again, that's another reason why there's a disconnect. Academia can spend a long time trying to work out some of these answers using very sophisticated approaches. But the problem is that we do policies in real time. We need to respond in real time to these issues. And I think that would happen in any academic discipline, that academia would be operating at a different speed to the world of policy. The difference is that we rely so much on economists for dealing with everyday issues. So I think that's one of the issues. And what the previous crises, I think, have also told us is that if there is going to be a change in economics, it's probably more likely to come from the engineering side, from the policymaking institutions, than it is from the academic side, because policymakers have to face the consequences of their mistakes. That academics can retreat into their beliefs, but policymakers can't do that. And so if they get things wrong, there will be a price to be paid. And so I think if there is a push for changing economics, I think it's coming more from the policy side than from academia.